This?
Yeah.
Yep. Testing, testing.
Oh, and then one on the chair.
Yeah, so technically it's for members of the book club, but what I was going to say is assuming that we're not
One more
full
time.
members, you guys can
Testing.
have whatever extra seats
Okay.
you got, right?
And the other chair?
But people who are members get preference over you, right? So
Testing,
worst case
testing.
scenario, you can stand in the back, but
Thank
the
you.
seats
You got it.
right?
Most of them are just to get most and say hi to Maya.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, cool. I would love to have you
School
Q&A
friends.
if you're interested in
Actually,
listening
can
to
I
it.
get a second one?
You may, yeah.
Oh yeah, the green with the like.
This, what was I
Does it have one of the little book things in it?
Should.
They're just so cute, and they're also signed by Comix. Did the Q&A.
That's all good. No, I have to remember how to do this. And yes, more items. That's what this is the second time.
I love this book, even though it is
$39.04. Yeah, that's my book, in fact.
You wrote this?
I, in fact, wrote that. So I write a monthly column.
Well, I like the Don Quixote reference, so that always just gives me a little bit of joy.
Make life easier, you get that one back. Yeah, so that's a collection of my monthly columns, like sort of the first 3 or 4 years of it. I've been writing a monthly column about comic book retailing for about 25 years now. So, yeah, it's something. It's probably boring to the layperson, but it's.
Well, again, I was like, it's probably not super relevant to me,
Yep.
but I love it anyway. Just because of the title and the subtitle and cover is fun too. We have, okay, yes.
We'll see you soon.
Hopefully after everyone
Yep.
gets a seat.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, so the piece of art they sent us has that dark green background. And I could rebuild it, but I just was like, find people here show up anyway, you know? And so I don't need to put any effort into this.
Yeah, that's fair.
And this just seemed like the easiest way to get around their art direction.
Great.
Now it works. Did they just like last minute were like, hey, we're gonna do this?
So they asked me 5 weeks ago if I wanted to do it, and I said, sure. And hello, Michael. And then they, what?
2 minutes ago?
Yeah, presumably, yeah.
Awesome. We ran into Maia over
Good,
at the
good,
thing.
yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, just there's a couple of other people who have come who aren't club members, and I said they can come if there are not seats filled. So go fill a seat.
Fill the seat.
Fill a seat is the thing to do.
Fill a seat. That's what you got.
Fill us.
What was I saying?
I think I want to say that
Oh, they
you
asked
can
if I
sit
think
wherever
so.
you want.
Oh,
Back a
and
little
then
bit
I'm
because
like,
if I
oh,
have to
sure,
be
I
early, I don't
guess.
want to be
And then they
perfect.
said,
Totally,
and
you
John Fan
you know what I might do then? I might throw my bag up here and I can sit.
And then no one let me know, so I completely fell out of my head, right? Because I couldn't do anything, right? So like 2 or 3 days ago, they're like, oh, and John Fan is confirmed. Oh, cool! Great! 10 days from now. Okay.
I could only statements.
Yeah.
Like my friend took me to
That's your beer?
You may not have.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was asking if that was my water.
Right.
Go.
Yeah, okay. Can you say?
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Okay, we're going live in 5, 4, 3.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of June. And our book this month is, I think, a really special one. It's Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe, who I'm really happy to have here next to me to talk about this book. You guys like
Are you going to
this?
sneak in for name correction?
Yeah.
Maia Kobabe.
Okay, Kobabe. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely no worries. Almost no one gets it right the
Okay.
first time. And I think practicing it my entire life, correcting people, was really good practice to correct people with my pronouns as an adult.
Yeah,
I
very
actually
good.
think it really primed me for my later in life experience. So,
Yeah.
no worries.
Yeah. Okay. You guys all like the book, right? Love it. And before we really start, I want to apologize in advance because I'm sure at some point I'm going to ask something dumb or misasked because I'm a 55-year-old straight white guy and it's hard for me to figure stuff out sometimes. So
I am not worried about that at all.
Cool.
Because first of all, I did volunteer. I wrote this book. And I very intentionally stepped into the role of someone who is going to be answering these questions. So
Yeah.
it's very welcome. And
Okay.
I also any question that is asked out of a place of genuine desire to understand another human experience, I'd say is a good question.
Yeah.
And the only bad question is one coming from a place of meanness
Yeah.
or trying to catch someone out. So
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to ask anything. that
okay,
is
I
gonna go
just
over.
wanted to sort of blanket that
yeah.
ahead of time. If I screw up the pronoun, I'm sure I'm going to do some sort of thing that's going to embarrass me horribly, in my own head at least. So
Don't worry about it. I'm so grateful
really-
to be here.
I'm actually really more worried about this interview than I've been with interviewing Neil Gaiman or something, because I don't want to mess this one up. All right, so one of the things that comics does, I think very well, is allows you to be in a place, in a headspace that you would never have considered. And it's because comics are an internal mechanism when you read them, right?
Yeah.
You hear the voice in your head. It's not something that's being projected to you. Mm-hmm. It's you're internalizing comics when you read them. And so a book like this, to me, is, and you might be embarrassed that I'm going to say this, is like a Persepolis or a Mouse or a Pyongyang or another book like that, which is really putting out an experience that I would never have any other way of knowing, and allowed me to personalize it in my own head and to understand it better, probably not all the way, but better.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly powerful, incredibly wonderful.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for giving me this experience. I don't get a lot of comics that allow me to do that, and that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's definitely part of why I wanted to write it. And I agree with you about I just love comics so much. And there's just that magic that happens in the gutter where your brain fills in the action is not there and turns it into something that's alive and not just still on the page. And there's, several people have asked me, why did you tell this story in comics other than another format, other than in prose or just, speaking it? And I was like, first of all, it's what I love. It's what I just trained in. I have a master's degree in comics. Mm-hmm. It's the way I feel most fluent in communicating with the world. And I also think there's something about comics, the way that you can write something in words and then contradict it in the art.
Yeah.
That just allows for so much nuance. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, comics are the best medium in the world. It's and you see, I didn't even have to ask why comics. Answered it without me doing it.
I'm into it.
Yeah. But why comics? Go back. Go. No. I mean, I mean it more like.
Why in my life?
Yeah. Why did you make that decision? When did you start reading? What's your earliest memories of comics?
My very earliest memories of comics are from probably about age 3 and 4. of my dad taking every Sunday the Sunday paper and spreading it out flat and like lying down on the floor, and me and my sibling lying down on either side, and him reading them each one out loud to us. So that's like my very earliest memory. And if you've read the book, you'll know that I was a very late reader. I didn't learn to read until I was 11. I'm very dyslexic. I'm a right-brained thinker. And so comics were a good gateway book for me, as for many people. Since there's less words per page and you get a lot of context through the art, I read comics like early in my reading. Mostly collections of newspaper strips. Like my library had really good. They had they had all the Peanuts. They had all the Foxtrot. They had all the Zits, Mutts. Everything. And I started just drawing little comics, as a kid, as I think many kids do. But then I really went and I focused on children's book illustration for a while. And so when I was in undergrad, I was totally thinking just book illustration, kind of much more fine arty direction. And I had a children's book manuscript that I was trying to push that no one was interested in. And I was going to events. I don't know if people know the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It is a really good organization for people who want to get into that field. But I went to their conferences and I was hearing things like, oh, you work on your portfolio and you submit for 5 years or 7 years or 9 years, and then publishers from above deigns to give you a book deal. And I was like, I can't wait that long. I gotta be making books right now. Whereas in that same year, I went to my first comic conventions. I went to WonderCon and Alternative Press Expo when they were both here, in San Francisco. In one sort of, I think one was in the summer and one was in the fall. And I had like my first little 5-page little stapled together, little tiny comic that I'd made. And people were like, oh, you made a comic? Welcome, you're a comics author. And people would I'd go up to people and I'd be like, oh, I made this comic, do you maybe want to look at it? And they'd be like, oh, do you want to trade? And Ed Luce, who's a local author who writes Lovable Oaf, traded me the full color issue 1 of Lovable Oaf for my 5-page little thing that I ran off, and treated me like such a professional. And so I really felt like children's books was this walled garden with a moat and a gate, and it was trying to keep me out. Whereas comics was like a hug, and it was welcoming me in. And I remember thinking, well, I still want to do children's books, but in the meantime, I think I'm going to self-publish comics, because that seems to be a cool thing that people that do and are into, and it wants newcomers to come into it. Yeah. So that was sort of.
God, I love that story. I love everything about that story. And you know what makes me sad about that story is that we don't have WonderCon or the Alternative Press Expo here in the Bay Area anymore.
They were such good shows.
They were such good shows. And every attempt to replace a show in San Francisco has been a pop culture movie star, TV star, autograph show.
I do love SF Zine Fest, and that I've done every year since 2013. That's a good one, but it's kind of the only thing that's left, and we used to have a bunch. And that gets talked about so much in indie comics communities, and several people have been like, Maya, do you ever want to organize a show? And I'm like, not right now. But the people who do run SF Zine Fest are really great, and I know that they're all constantly dreaming about bigger venues, and so we'll see. Maybe that will grow and expand.
Yeah, well, the problem has always been Moscone doesn't want to give dates more than 6 months in advance. And you can't do a show like a comic show in 6 months. It's not possible,
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Boy, that was a tangent. I'm sorry.
That is inside baseball over here. But anyway, so after a couple of years after undergrad, I audited a class that was taught by Matt Sillity, who is now the chair of the MFA in Comics program at CCA, but that did not exist yet. And so I audited a class with him, and I loved it so much, and that's when I started a webcomic called The Thief's Tale, which I worked on for many years and is completely in a hiatus right now. And he, halfway through the class, was like, can you keep a secret? And I was like, yes. And he was like, I'm trying to start this MFA program at CCA. Would you be interested in applying for it? I was like, absolutely. So I was right in on the ground floor of that. So I applied in the first ever class and graduated from there in 2015. And the end of the program, CCA bought a lot of tables at shows, and I got to table with Ed Luce, who was one of my thesis advisors, and it was just this beautiful moment of you were the person who for the first person who made me feel like a real player in or a real person trying to do comics, and now here 4 years later I'm behind the table and we're tabling next to each other and we're selling our stuff right next to each other.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I was just comics,
Yeah.
I love you forever. Like,
Yeah.
I'm in. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was that first year like at CCA? I mean, do you think this is
Yeah.
purely me asking, this is not a gotcha question, but
Yeah.
did they have it together? Did they have the program figured out yet, do you think? Or
They were one step ahead.
Okay.
One step ahead of, of where we were soon. We call it, we of the class of 2015 call ourselves the guinea pig class.
right? Yeah.
When we started, there were exactly 12 students in the whole program, and it was during the summer, and there were like 4 teachers, and it was like the 16 of us were like the only people on the whole campus.
Right.
So it felt very private, it felt intimate, it felt experimental, and amazing, and just like the most exciting, fun, weird comics summer camp for adults. That's what it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many of your classmates have gone on to do a book?
That's such a good question.
I feel like it's at least half, right?
So Sam Satin is
Yeah.
one in my grade, and he's published a bunch of things. Glint came out from Lion Forge, and the I'm forgetting the name of it. The one that's set in the Bay, the post-apocalyptic animal story legend. Trinidad Escobar was in my grade, and she has a book deal of Sea and Venom. It's coming out in about 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
A very good friend of mine who's in the book, Ashley Guillory, is now a storyboard artist in Los Angeles. So she actually went a little bit away from comics through the much related field of storyboard art.
Sure.
And Bex, who's a classmate of ours, is in the middle of laboring through just a masterpiece that's going to blow people's heads off, but she needs 2 or 3 more years on it, probably. And then one of them, when I was a full-time teacher at an art school in East, one person I have a little bit lost touch with, but he has self-published a ton of stuff, and he's based in Columbus, Ohio. So pretty much everyone is doing comics, but people have threaded out into different paths a little.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember coming out and talking to your class too.
You did,
'cause,
yeah. We
yeah.
met briefly in
Yeah.
probably 2015.
Yeah.
You came and visited Melanie Gilman, another person who's in the book.
Yep.
And I sketched you in my sketchbook.
Yep. Oh, did you?
I did, yeah. I didn't bring that with me. Yeah.
Wow.
I'll email that to you later.
Cool. No, I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. I remember you actually asked some pretty good questions, if I remember correctly.
Oh, I'm sure I asked
Yeah.
great questions. Yeah, real good questions.
Well, no, because some people don't ask any questions, and some people
Yeah.
are.
Well,
It wasn't that year. The next year I went, there was one guy. I can't remember who it is. He was really combative. He wanted to challenge everything about comics, and so I was the mainstream comic guy to challenge, I guess.
That's so
and I'm like,
hilarious.
I mean, okay, here's how Marvel does business, but I don't want to defend that.
I guess I was gonna say.
That's not what I'm trying to,
Yeah, I read the speech from the retailers convention. I thought that was a great.
Thank you.
That was a great speech.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was important to me to come out and talk to a graduating class of future cartoonists, because looking at other schools that were putting out people, I never thought that the actual how do you sell things portion of it was ever particularly well taught.
Yeah, certainly
right?
not in undergrad. Certainly not in undergrad.
Yeah. And so I thought it was important to have someone come out and go, here's how the market works. These are useful things to know, probably. Yeah. It was just a couple years later that you have a book. I mean, that is not very long.
No.
So how did this come about?
How did this come about?
The process.
So, anyone who follows me on Instagram will remember, perhaps, that I started posting a series called Genderqueer, but one word squished together, in October of 2016. They're little, they're like this big. I brought some of the originals. They're like, I drew them in a notebook like this. I'll sort of aim this at the camera a little bit. So 6 to a sheet. In these are Waldorf main lesson books for people who recognize what that is. And I started them because I was really frustrated. I was starting to come out as non-binary to my family and immediate friends, sort of an intimate circle to begin with. And I have a very loving and accepting family, as anyone who's read the book knows. So it wasn't hard in that sense. It was hard in the sense of me saying, hey, I've been thinking about gender every single day since I was 12. And this is like some of the things that I've come to and what it means to me. And people being like, we love you, we support you, we don't understand what you're talking about because we have not been thinking about gender maybe at all ever, depending on the person. And so I kept having these conversations with people where I would try to explain like, well, this is what I mean by that, or this is where I'm coming from, and I just never felt like I could finish my point. Like they would ask a question, or I would get on a tangent, or something would be time to make dinner, or just like life, and I would just be like, I just never can explain what I'm trying to say. And going back to comics, and I was like, I need to try to write about this because I need time to sit down by myself and explain and get the thought out in a complete form, in a concise form. And comics are the medium that I've been trained in, that I love so much, that I think would be good for this. So I started writing these little things, and they were totally non-chronological. Anytime I had a thought that related to gender, I would just draw it in whatever order and not try to make any kind of overarching narrative. There were a few artists that really inspired me in those really early stages. One was James Kachalka. I was looking at American Elf. I straight up just ripped off the American Elf little format, even the little title, the way it was lettered. I obviously was a big fan of Alison Bechdel, Fun Home. I also really like Lucy Nisley's memoir work, especially like the very simple sort of dot-I style. So I was just pouring out these little things, and I drew 60 of them before I showed them to anyone because I was very scared about talking publicly about stuff that's so inner. I am by nature actually a pretty introverted and shy person. And before this experience of coming out and writing about it publicly, if you had told me when I was like 20 that I would be sitting here talking about this sort of thing in front of anyone, I'd been like, absolutely not. So it's been a journey. So I wrote all these strips because I was like, I just have to express this somehow, and words are not enough. And then I chose the Inktober challenge, and I was like, I'm going to post one every day on Instagram. And I used that challenge to force myself to post them because there were a few where I'm like writing about something like masturbation or something. And I was like, I don't want to post this one. Everyone's going to see this. And I would post it at like 3 in the morning in hopes that like it wouldn't be seen, but that's not how the algorithms work. Anyway, so that was like a trial by fire of like posting them and being like, what response is this going to get? And the response it got was like amazing. Like people just respond to them so much more than any of the fiction work I had ever done up to that point. I'd been working, as I mentioned, this series called The Thief's Tale, which is a black and white, all ages, medieval fantasy story that I worked on for 5 years. I produced 300 pages of that, all of which are sitting in my closet doing nothing at this point. I learned a lot from it though.
Sure.
And I'd been posting online and people are like, oh yeah, it's, and then I started writing about gender and identity and sexuality and all of those things in their confusing and multiple forms. And people were immediately like, this, I feel this too. I never knew there was a word for this. I thought I was the only person in the world who felt this. I didn't know I wasn't alone. Things like that. And so I did that for almost 2 years before I was like, oh, I think there's a book in this.
Okay.
And it was the little tiny zines. I took them.
Props. I love it. Yeah. No, I'm really glad. Some people do
yeah.
and some people don't. It makes life so much better.
They look like this. They're very small.
Nice.
So by this point, I've been doing it for like 2 years, so we're into mid-2017. What are years? 2017, I guess. So my friend Sam, who I'd already mentioned, had gotten a book deal at Lion Forge, and his editor was Andrea Colvin, who's wonderful. And he emailed her these, and she apparently sat there for an hour and read all of them. We're like, yes, these are good. And so Sam was like, she said they are good. Meet her at Comic-Con. Say that you're a friend of mine. And so I went up to her after a panel at Comic-Con, and I gave her these, and she was like, oh, yes, I like these very much. Here's my business card. We'll put a pitch together. And I was like, oh, wow, thank you. So my initial pitch was, Dear Lion Forge, would you like to take these little comics that I've drawn, I have like 150 of them, and produce, I was imagining just like a really cute small book that's like 4 by 4 inches and like an inch thick. That's just collecting all the work I'd already done.
Right.
And they were like, no, we don't want to do that. But how about you take all the same material, expand it, turn it from vignettes into a narrative, comic size page, full color. What about that? And I said, Yes. I said, yes, I'll do that. Yeah. So that was the sort of genesis of this.
Did the prospect of that scare you or thrill you or both?
I was so ready to have a book deal.
Okay.
Mostly I was excited, and for me, the most difficult part of comics is thumbnailing and writing. I
Sure.
feel like I'm more of an artist that's had to
Understood.
learn how to write.
Yeah.
So the fact that I had so much of it written already
Yeah.
felt like a huge
That
step.
makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. I just I don't know even if I were waiting for that book deal, I think I would be daunted by now I've got to take these sketches and turn it into a book, right? Because they're different things in a fundamental way, right?
I think that the main thing was I didn't know how much I was going to have to say. So I was like, they were like, when you turn it into a book, I was like, well, how long does it have to be? Can it be like 100 pages? And they were like, well, let's say at least 120, because that's like a, that's like a trade. And I was like, okay, 120. And then I started writing it, and I was like, I think it's going to
240,
be... I think it's gonna be like 150 maybe. And then I did a draft, I was like, maybe pushing 200.
Right.
I turned in a draft that was 260 pages.
Okay.
And we had to edit it down. So it was just when I started writing, I was like, oh no, I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I find that's really beautiful about the book is that you talk about a whole lot of things that are not gender or they're just who you are as a person. The obsessive lists you made of books when you were a kid, which to me, like, I totally related to that. Like, there were all these entry points. The commonalities, I thought, were the great part of this. I don't know.
Yeah, I tell people it's a book about gender and identity and being a nerd who reads a lot.
Sure. That it is. So... what was your process of taking, you said 150?
Yeah, or there's about.
What was your process of taking that and then turning into a manuscript, I guess? Did you turn it into a manuscript? Did you re-thumb roll?
So I printed them all out.
Okay.
And I cut them up and I laid them on the floor in chronological order because I'd never done that before. And I looked at them, and that's when I realized, like, what I had...
Production order?
No, the order of my life chronologically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Life order, okay.
Life order. Because I had not done that when I was writing them, and that helped me figure out, like, what areas I had clearly covered more and which areas I had completely left out. And basically what I realized was that I had done a lot of strips about the previous 3 to 4 years and much less about the earlier parts of my life.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I have, like, 6 about childhood and like 4 about high school and then like 20 about college and then like 50 about grad school or whatever it was. And so I was like, oh, I'm really going to have to fill in the earlier life stuff. Handily, I've been keeping a journal since I was 12. So I read all of my journals, and what I discovered is I've been the same person the whole time. And but I was able to then like remember like, oh yeah, okay, and then pull sort of like memories. And that's when there are places where there are conversations that none of the conversations are like verbatim, but they are to my best of my memory in a condensed
Sure, of
form.
course.
So that's but there are a few lines of like dialogue that are like directly pulled from like journal entries. So yeah, that was really useful. And then whenever possible, I just traced the small comics, but I had to redraw, I would say 75% of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But at the point where you're turning it from those 150 strips, I should say, not illustrations, to a manuscript of some kind, so that it can be edited. Yeah, right. I'm getting the steps there. Yeah. So you're not. What are you? What are you drawing? What are you tracing at that point?
Well,
Like what was it that Andrea was looking for from you? Was she looking for a written script? Was she looking for a thumbnailed book? Was she?
This is what my thumbnails look like.
Okay.
Not much.
Yeah.
Not much, folks.
Yeah.
Not much.
Yeah.
I thumbnailed almost entirely at full page size in really tatty composition books, and I would say the main thing that I needed to turn into Andrea and that I needed to figure out was how many words can I fit on a page, and like where do the page breaks need to be, and how long does the scenes need to be. And I was also very aware that probably pages were going to be pulled during the editorial process, so I wanted every single scene to end at the bottom of a page. I never have a scene start in the middle of a page. And I also, there really aren't any double page spreads in the book, because I had a feeling things would get plucked and rearranged, and I wouldn't have a huge amount of control over that. So what I turned into Andrea was like, this is the flow of it. Like, this is how it's gonna, this is what it's gonna read like in a narrative form instead of a series of vignettes.
Yeah.
And I would say the most editorial process was her going, especially the first half, and being like, we need more in this childhood. We need more, we need more. I really almost didn't want to talk about my childhood stuff. I'm not really sure why. I think part of it was because the memories are fuzzier, and I just was like hesitant to, I didn't want to make anything up. So, but she would be like, okay, but this is, and then every time I'd give her more, she'd be like, yeah, this is great. I love all this new stuff. Can you add a little bit more? I was like, okay, all right.
So some of the decisions you're talking about are very craft-oriented decisions in terms of number of words on a page, the scenes beginning and ending on a page. I mean, that's all craft. You literally went to a school and have a master's degree in comics. Was this taught in the school? I'm not trying to be critical of that. I'm just really curious about this part of it, because there's the difference between sort of the language of comics and the craft and the specific of comics.
That's such a good question. It's hard to remember when I learned things. But I mean, I would honestly say the biggest thing that I learned at CCA is the scene that's in the opening of the book. And if people have read it, it's a class I took with Mari Nomi, who's a memoir comic. I'm sure you have some of her stuff here. The big one that she had out at that time is called Kiss and Tell, a romantic, My Romantic Adventures Age 0 to 22, I think is the subtitle. And she really pushed us to write about our secrets. And at the time I was like, no. And I feel like she taught that lesson, and it took me an additional 4 years to get it. But I did get it. So that was like, I feel like that's like a huge thing I took away from CCA, that I don't know. I might have got there on my own, but it would have taken maybe 10 more years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's usually when people say, do I need to go to a grad school to learn comics? I'm always like, no, absolutely. You can learn on your own. But it will shorten your learning curve considerably.
Yeah.
So.
But the mechanical parts of comics are still like how many words are on a page? I know the one time I tried to write a script, right? I took an Alan Moore comic and I counted the number of words, and I went, all right, well, that's my maximum number. And then I actually wrote like 20% more words, because that's what you do, right? And that's way too many words. Way too many words, right? Yeah. But like, who teaches you this stuff? Like, it's not, I don't even know that. Like, there's not a rule, right?
No, there's not a rule. I mean, people will give you there are guidelines, like, I think there's Neil Gaiman wrote a guideline on how to write a script, and I think he said, like, no more than 20 words per speech bubble, and I think he said no more than, like, 10 speech bubbles to a page. I'm making these numbers up.
Sure.
I don't know. For me, it's super feelingsy. It's almost heading into the direction of poetry.
Right.
It's like, for me, fewer is better. So any word you can cut. If I'm going through and realize I've included like an adjective, I'm like, ugh, go away. So fewer is better, but it's like, I don't know. It's very hard. This
is interesting. Are the adjectives communicated through the art? Yeah, not through the words, right? No. Yeah, it's the art that, wow, I hadn't thought about that until you said it. See, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can still come up with, whoa, comics theory, holy shit. Yeah. It's neat. Yeah. Okay, so she wants more and more and more from you. At what point was it enough? That you knew it was enough? She knew it was enough?
I think probably like 3 drafts in, we were both like, yeah, this sounds good now. Yeah. And she said something to me which was like so true. She says, your process is very iterative. And I was like, yes. I am so in awe of Tilly Walden, who apparently can sit down on a blank sheet of paper and just bust out a finished page in one go. For me, almost every piece of art that I make, it gets better every time I do another draft.
Sure.
And that can become problematic because I'm tempted to just make infinite drafts. Because this thought like, oh, well, if I did it once and then I did it, it was 50% better the second time and then 25 additional % better the next time and then, like Zeno's paradox of like it's half % better every time you do it. Maybe I should just keep doing it forever. Like when I turned in the draft, which I usually work traditionally. This book I penciled traditionally but inked digitally to save time. But when I turned in the final page of digital inks, I told Andrea, if you had given me another year, I would print out these inks on paper and I would ink over them a second time traditionally.
Sure.
And she goes, that sounds like you. Yeah.
I can see that too, because there's at least 2 sequences in here where even your storytelling is iterative, where it's like a balloon that leads to a balloon that leads to the balloon that leads to the, like that's a very not formula is the wrong word, but
yeah, it's the one step leads to the next step leads to the next step always.
Yeah.
Yes, into the infinite horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I love this book.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? Because I can keep talking like forever, but yeah, Keith.
I've got one question, just about the relationship with like an editor and getting this book deal. How much creative control did you expect to have, and then how much were you given, and were you surprised by that?
Great question.
I expected to have almost all the control, and I had almost all the control.
Nice.
But because I had that because Andrea and I were on the same page. Like she liked what she saw from the start, and she wanted it to be successful, and she defended it at every stage. And like people ask me, did she tell you like what to write? And absolutely not. She would only tell me more of this or less of this. So she would say like, can we make this scene? Can you like? It seems like you have something more to say. Is there another page in this? Or other areas? I think we have said this in another part. Maybe this can be one page, or can we take this out altogether? So that was pretty much most of the things she said. And the other thing she said was, "This is good. This is worth doing. This is worth your time." And that was very important to hear. As I worked on it, like probably 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for like a year, because I, like from signing book deal to turning in final art, this book took like a year. But that's
fast.
Very fast.
Very fast.
But it's because I've been writing it for 2 years before
Understood.
that, and then thinking about it for all of my life prior to that as well. So yeah, I feel like I had a ton of control. The only place where I didn't have control is that there was a couple pages got cut by legal because I'd included some pop culture references that I thought fell under fair use, and they disagreed. So we did actually have to cut one 7-page scene very late in the process, like in January of this year, it got cut. And so that was the only time that I felt a little bit not in control of it, was when the lawyers stepped in. But we worked it out, so. I mean, yeah. I had drawn Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, and I had drawn Sirius and Remus, and I had drawn characters from Queer as Folk, and I had drawn David Bowie, and I had drawn, a bunch of pop culture figures, and they were like, we don't want to get sued. And I was like, I think this is okay. And they're like, we disagree. And I was like, all right.
Was that the part of the book about fan shipping?
Yes. So there's
headcanon. Okay.
Yes.
I think that's what they were worried about.
Yes. So I do talk about fan stuff in the book, but like they're also in the One Direction section, I had in the first version of the page I had just drawn the One Direction boys, and they were like, oh, we can't show their faces. Oh no. And I was like, okay, well, let's work on this. Can we show the CD cover? And they were like, also no. Maybe an edited version. So I drew like an edited version of the CD cover. And then even some of the pages that have books on them, I had drawn them with the covers showing. And they said, you can say the title, but you can't show the cover art. So I had to redraw the page so you only see the spines. So things like that.
But some cover art is in here.
I got permission for a couple of things.
Mercedes Lackey gave you permission?
I got permission from Mercedes Lackey to include the cover. Yeah, so that anytime there is a cover, and anything that I quote is, I got permission from Alison Bechtel to include that panel. I got permission from Terry Moore for the covers of Strangers in Paradise. Mercedes Lackey. Oh, I'm gonna forget now who else. There were all of those emails were very exciting for me to receive because I am a big fan. Yeah.
When you get permission for something like that, are you? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut it off. But when you get permission for something like that, are you sending them the whole manuscript, or are you? How do you approach that as an author?
So it was interesting because I thought that I asked Andrea and was like, don't you think the email should come from you? Doesn't it seem more official if it's coming from the publisher? And she goes, I think it would be better if it came from you, actually, because it's more personal if it comes from the author. And I was like, oh, that's not what I would have expected, but all right. So no, I would email the person and I would usually say, my name and what I'm working on, and I would link to something to show, like, this is a real project. I'd link to, like, the Hollywood Reporter review and, like, the Goodreads page, a few things, be like, this is a real book, I promise. And then I would say, I quote or excerpt or show the cover of whatever your work on one page. I've attached that page. If you would also like to see a full manuscript of where it's at now, I will be happy to also include that. But I didn't usually include it in the email because some people's, like, emails, if there's a big attachment, it goes to spam or something.
Well, and also authors can't just take manuscripts because
right, and plus I didn't want to like waste their time, so I was like, here's the one page that you're like Tamora Pierce is another person I got permission from, and I was like, I include the drawing of your character and one quote. Here's what it looks like, and like if you want to know more, you can. So yeah.
How many of them asked for more? Just out of curiosity.
No one asked for more.
Okay.
They were all like, looks good.
Looks good. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up on that? I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off.
No, that was it. I'm just excited.
I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Okay, what's up?
Did you take out Tamora Pierce for coffee afterwards?
No, so I sent her a copy as a thank you, and I signed it, and I wrote like a letter. But it was more like I emailed her, the email that's on her website, and I actually got her assistant responded to me, but said, Tammy says it looks great. And I was like, ah. So if I ever see her, you can bet your ass I'm going to be going up and being like, so I was the author of that book. I love you. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Lionforge is a relatively new publisher. What made you go with them other than Sam kind of pushing Andrea on you? Was that the?
I mean, that was definitely the intro point. But I wouldn't have gone with them if I hadn't totally clicked with Andrea like right away. And I just, she just like loved the project so much, and like she really shepherded it through the submissions process. Like she was like, put together. Like, put together your art, put together your cover letter. I'm going to look over it, and I will, if I think I need to change anything. And so we did that. We did with the version with the strips that was rejected, and then they said you can resubmit. And so she was like, can you pencil at least 10 pages to let me know what that would look like? And then I actually penciled 40 pages, and then I sent that to her. And so then she took it through again. So she really was like very much like, she was almost acting like my agent as well in some senses. So I would say like, yeah, Lionforge has been through some changes.
They certainly have.
Recently. When I signed with Lionforge, I mean, they were, and still are, talking about how important diversity is to the company. And that was also very important to me. And I got to sit at their table at the Eisners last year at Comic-Con, and I looked around the table, and it was like, Andrea, my editor, Steens was at that table, Amanda Meadows was at that table with her husband, Sam and his wife were at that table, and Hazel Newlevant was at that table, and I was like, dang, like at this table there are 2 non-binary people, 2 Jewish men, 2 black women, an interracial couple, there's like, I was just looking around being like, this is, like, they're walking the talk, like, this is for real, like, this is who makes up this company, and it felt like such a family, and I was like, I am so proud to be at this company. And unfortunately, over half those people are no longer at Lionforge post this merger. My editor, Andrea, is no longer, was like left literally the week my book came out, as did Steens, who's the other editor I'd worked with, because I'd done some pieces for Rolled and Told magazine. So it feels like a totally different company now in an interesting way, and I feel like I'm having to sort of almost like re-meet the company I recently got to meet some of the people from Oni who are stepping in, and they all seem really.
They're all really wonderful
they're
people.
lovely
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, they are. They really are. They really are.
But I almost feel like I signed with one company. I'm working for a different one now in an interesting way. So I'm very curious to see. I mentioned to someone earlier. I feel like the next 1 to 2 years of books that come out will let us know what this new polarity Lion Forge Oni Press really is. They kind of almost feel like we need to treat it as a new company.
Yeah.
Totally new company.
I mean, I'd like to think there's at least some commonalities. I mean, certainly they published the guide to they them pronouns, right? I mean, no one else in the comic space is doing that. They have the whole pornography line, which is not straight pornography.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fantastic.
No,
you know?
I mean, I love Oni books. So when I started, back to an earlier conversation, I read American comic strips, and then I read almost exclusively just manga and Japanese comics and Korean comics and stuff. And I really didn't get into reading American comics until a couple of years after that. And Oni books were a lot of the first books that were stepping stones for me between manga and reading Western comics. Scott Pilgrim and the Courtney Crumlin series. I love Tammy Faye.
Yep.
So I'm very familiar with Oni books, and I love Oni books. I in fact have submitted and had been rejected from Oni for the Thief's Tale project. So I had been kind of like snooping out their editors for a while, trying to be like, who would be the most interested in this. So yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think that there's a lot of potential to make really interesting and good work. I just, like I said, it just feels like a new company that we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, and it's certainly strange when the person who shepherded you through is no longer there anymore.
Yeah.
And yet you're with this company, and you know, I mean, the one thing I'll say is that they, as a company, were so behind this book. I don't know that I've seen quite a full court press to retailers. You know, like, this is a serious book. You need to stock this book. This is important. You should pay attention. And they were right. I mean, this is an important book that people should pay attention to, I think.
Yeah, I have absolutely no complaints on. I mean, like I said, working with the editorial has been amazing. Working with the marketing has been amazing. And that for me has been the biggest change from being someone who is self-published for years and years and years to going to having a actually publishing deal is really the marketing and the distribution light years beyond anything I could have done on my own.
Sure, absolutely.
Like putting it sponsored ads on these websites that I've never even heard of, but are apparently really important to booksellers. Like, I didn't know what Idlewise was.
Sure.
I still don't fully and things.
They're a service that puts PDFs and things out to booksellers so they can check out books ahead of time.
Yeah, it's really important apparently if you're a retailer, and if you don't, you've never heard of it.
Sure.
So yeah.
Sorry, insider baseball.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, let's go.
They did a great job.
Let's go a little more general then.
Yeah.
Let's stop the insider baseball because I like it and you like it.
I love it.
No one else
I like nothing more than talking shop.
Yeah. Craft-wise, Phoebe is the colorist of this. How did that come about? That you decided either not to or to bring Phoebe in, or talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah. And so, interesting note, so Phoebe has switched pronouns since this book has been published. Readers of the book, we used she, her pronouns and the word sister for Phoebe in the book. And I think that's perfectly fine to talk about like Phoebe, the character. But Phoebe, my sibling, who I love and adore, now uses they, them pronouns as of like 2 months ago. And I've already, this wasn't a surprise to me. It was something we talked about. But literally, they were like, hey, I'm switching to these pronouns. And like the first thing I said after like, I love you and I support you was like, hey, if you ever want to write a book, I'll draw it. If you want to write your memories of our childhood, think about it, a box set. Just let me I know you came out yesterday, but let me just like plant this seed early. Anyway, so like I said, I mostly work traditionally. I knew that if I was to digital color the book myself, it would both be not great and it would take forever. So I had told Lion Forge early on, I had actually pitched a black and white book, and they were the ones who said, let's do it in color. So I was like, okay, well, if it's going to be in color, I want a colorist because it would be so frustrating. It would be so not a good experience for me to do that myself. And I immediately, and then my sister, again, this is new, my sibling, Phoebe, is also an artist and works much more in digital than I do. They went to Otis College of Art and Design for motion graphics. Mostly they work in advertising, and it was quite a pay cut to work as a comic colorist for six to 8 months on this book. But it's a project of passion for both of us. And I knew I wanted to work with Phoebe for a couple of reasons. One being, there's so much I wouldn't have to explain. Phoebe was there for almost all my childhood, so I wouldn't have to explain things like, remember the warm quality of light in our childhood home. This scene, I want it to be bluish because it was stressful, or like, this is what this person looks like, or like, this is like the color palette of our elementary school. Like, Phoebe knows all those things because they were there too. They've been to every same school that I went to, every job that I've worked at, they would visit, they have been in those locations. So I knew it would just be this really, it would cut out a huge chunk of sort of like the explaining process that I would have had to gone through with a colorist that I didn't know.
Sure.
And then also it is a very intimate book. And like there are scenes where I was like, there are a few scenes that were genuinely hard for me to draw. And I knew that I wouldn't have to explain that to Phoebe, and then I wouldn't have to like go through mostly the pap smear exam scenes with someone that I maybe didn't know as well, and try to explain like, this is why I want the colors to be this way because this is the emotions of that scene. Phoebe would just like, no. And then also, we got to talk on the phone all the time. So we had actually been talking about starting a podcast right before we started this book, because we're like, we have to call each other more. We're very close. We're like 2 years apart in age. We shared a bedroom until we both moved out for college, but now they live in Los Angeles, and I miss them desperately all the time, and we are very bad at calling regularly. So we're like, maybe if we start a podcast, we'll call each other like every 2 weeks or something.
At least to work together.
And then we started the book instead. So we haven't done the podcast yet. And even if it was just to be like, hey, I really need those files, at least we'd be chatting, and then usually we'd be like, also, how was your weekend? So.
How much of the book was drawn when you brought them in?
I pitched the project with them.
Oh, okay.
So I literally in the pitch packet I was like, and it would need to digital colorist. I recommend my sibling.
Very good.
So nepotism from day one. Yeah.
Questions? Yeah.
Sure. With so much of this being personal and talking about family, how was it talking about things that were personal with your parents, and how did they receive this?
Great question. Interesting. Good. So I had been showing my mom the little strips periodically, and my mom has just had such great reaction lines that I have then turned into art. She's such a good sport about letting me draw her all the time. So when I was showing her the strips, one of the things she said was, I didn't realize you had been thinking about this for so long. And I was like, yes, I have. So I knew it was going to be, I had to just accept the premise. I'm writing a book of which one of the subjects is sex, and my parents will read it. Every person who has written a book that has sex in it has to accept the fact that their parents, if they're not dead, may read it. So I kind of just had to accept that as a base level and just be okay with that inside myself. And then my mom read it in drafts. So my mom read it, I think, at the penciled manuscript, and then the inked manuscript, and then when we were finishing the colors. So read it throughout. I asked my dad, do you want to read it? But he was like, I'd rather wait till it's a book. And I was like, all right. But I did print out every page that he appeared on, and I made him read all of the pages that he appeared on to fact check them, which was good because he did actually catch a few errors. So they knew, and I live at home. I'm 30 years old. I live with my parents. This is the only reason that I can afford to be a freelance artist in the Bay Area. I would not have been able to make this book in a year, or maybe even in 5 years, were my career not 100% subsidized by my loving and supportive parents, which is a great privilege that I am aware of every day. So I'm very close with my family, and I prepped them. I told them, I'm working on this book, just so you know there's this stuff in it, you will appear in it, I'm publishing it under my real name, just be ready. I sort of prepped them throughout the process, and they, and my mom had feedback. I changed a few lines of dialogue, especially the ones that my mom had said based on her feedback. Nothing drastic, but she was just I feel like you made it sound harsher than I meant it. And I was like, that's fair. So they're really proud of me. And Even if they don't get my pronouns right every time, like, my dad's so cute. Like, he Googles it on Amazon to see, like, what book pops up and the, like, customers bought this with. And he found that, like, what customers bought this book was, like, George Takei's biography, and he's like, you should send a copy to George Takei. And I was like, I don't know that it would reach him, but I love where you're thinking. Like, I love where that's coming from.
Oh, I'm sure we could figure out a way to get a copy to George
Well, he's
Takei.
writing comics now.
That's what I'm
so
saying.
He feels more accessible.
I'm sure that there's someone at IDW we could figure out a way to make that happen, if that was the thing you wanted to make happen.
Maybe.
Yeah. That seems like that could be done. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
You mentioned having your parents fact check. Is that like a standard part of writing an autobiography, having family input, or is that just something you wanted?
A bit of both.
Legal thing too?
You do have to get written permission from everyone who appears in a memoir. And to what level is somewhat dependent on the publisher. So with Lion Forge, they were okay as long as I wrote an email to the person saying, like, you appear, this is, like, I usually send them the pages that they appeared on, whoever it was. And I would sometimes, some people I ask, like, do you want me to change your name? I usually wouldn't do that ahead of time unless I had, I would ask the person, like, do you want that? And only a few people said yes, and I, of course, respected it every time. And then I would usually just forward that set of emails to Lion Forge, so they didn't need, like, a signed thing. Like, no one had to, like, sign anything, but they wanted to at least see, like, okay, you checked with so-and-so. And actually, the reason why you even have to do this is because there was a faked memoir that came out a few years back. I don't remember the title of it. It was a prose novel, not a comic. And it was a person who wrote this whole memoir claiming this whole thing, and I've not read it.
Is it the JT whatever?
I'm not going to remember now. I read an article on it because they were like, this is why, and I Googled it, and I was like, oh, crazy. So if you Google it, it'll come up. I'm sorry I don't remember any of the details, but basically someone made it all up. It was completely faked. But the publishers didn't realize that, and now publishers are more careful with memoir. They make you do a little bit of more checking.
So they're more worried about you making things up than people.
I mean, a little bit of both. Like, they want to make sure it's not all a lie, for sure. And then it was very important to me to make sure that I didn't want this book to ruin any relationships. This was not a bridge burning book. I wanted this book to build relationships. I wanted this book to strengthen my relationships in my community. So it was very important to me, which almost ties back into, like, the legal thing we were talking about earlier. I was so careful. I checked with every single person, even people who don't appear on the page but whom I referenced. I emailed. I had to go back and email my first grade crush because of the appearance. I emailed my one and only ex-girlfriend, like, people that it was embarrassing to email. My high school crush, like, I emailed everyone to make sure that they were okay with it. And I was so careful about that. And I just included all these celebrities because I was like, that doesn't matter.
Well, they're public figures, right?
I know.
The ghost of Oscar Wilde.
They would think they would like the publicity.
Was Z one of the people who asked to not have their identity?
No, I actually just didn't want to say Z's name. I just didn't. I felt weird about that. So that was actually in my draft. I included Z is the one girl that I dated. And I showed her the pages, and I asked, like, literally, if you want any, like, I didn't really. It looks a little bit like her, but I didn't really try. I didn't want her to be recognized.
Sure.
So I didn't make it exactly how she looked. But I was like, if it's too similar, I can change it. If there's, like, anything that's weird, if you feel uncomfortable, I literally will change anything. And she was like, no, it looks fine. And I was like, you're such a beautiful soul. How would I get so lucky with my one ex?
Yeah, I was actually almost wondering about this, and you can tell me if this is too harsh of a question, but both with Z and with, I forget the other, the earlier one. I feel like in both cases you really broke their hearts. And I'm not blaming you for that. But you almost don't confront it in the text of the work. Yeah? You know, and I wonder, especially going through the process where you're contacting them, of I'm writing about this. Did you go through that again, or or did you have to keep a distance? Or I'm sorry, tell me that that's...
No. This is a great question. This is a great question. So I think the other person you're referring to is the girl who in college. I think the name is Autumn in the book.
I want to say Autumn. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. Yep.
So Autumn is actually someone I didn't ask because I've completely lost contact with her. But I fictionalized it. Autumn was not her name. That happened, and the phone conversation is mostly real. But the other timeline, I had to really condense it. It happened over like a longer period of time.
I mean, I feel like you crushed Autumn. And. Not intentionally.
So
you weren't
young.
trying to. No, of course. You were young, of course.
Idiot.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. It took me a long time to realize coming out as bi was easy. Coming out as non-binary has been challenging, but not hard to pin down. Like, it's so true that it's not like there's no like, oh, maybe this isn't like figuring out that and coming out about aromanticism and asexuality has perhaps been the most difficult, because both of those things are, instead of like, so when I was like figuring out I was bi, I was like, oh, I have crushes on people who are male and female and gender ambiguous. So that's the proof, that's the evidence. But like the evidence of asexuality and aromanticism is a lack of evidence. So it's like much harder to pin those down. So like, I didn't talk about this super a lot in the book, but like you guys maybe know the term like heteronormativity. We live in San Francisco, we know this term. So I would say like as much as young people are very much sort of like have heteronormativity, I would say beamed at them from every single piece of media basically ever. A step even more meta beyond that is we have monogamous romantic normativity beamed at people as well. And that is even existing inside queer media. There is an assumption that as an adult person, you will want to be romantic and sexually active, almost across the board. And if you aren't, that a lot of people are very weirded out by that. And so I, for many, many years, assumed that I am a late bloomer in almost everything. Didn't learn to read till I was 11.
Sure.
Didn't learn to drive till I was like 20. Didn't get a cell phone until I was like 21. Just like emotional landmarks, technology landmarks, learning goals. Like I hit almost every landmark later than my peers. So I kind of just assumed like, well, everyone else keeps saying like, oh, you just haven't met the right person. At some point you'll want to do all this relationship stuff. And I was like, well, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't seem like I will, but everyone says I will, so is everyone wrong? Yes, they were. So I don't know. I feel like looking back, there are people who were interested in me romantically, and I wish I had just been able to tell them right off the bat, I'm sorry, friend, but that's just never going to happen because I'm not made that way. And instead what I said was like, well, not now, but maybe someday, because that's the messaging I was receiving from everywhere in the world. And so I don't know. So I maybe have broken people's hearts, but it's because I didn't understand myself.
Sure, I understand. I wasn't trying to.
Yeah, but in specifically about Z, like we dated for 2.5 months, which isn't that long, and it was. We met on Tinder. It was very like, this is a flirty, like, was out of a recent breakup. We weren't like, we're looking for soulmates. We were like, I'm looking for a fun person to have sex with. You know what I mean? So we both went into it with like the same kind of vibe. And I think as soon as she was like, I think I might be interested in something more, is when I was like, I'm not. And I'm going to depart this relationship. So, and I think that because it was that tone, like actually reaching out to her wasn't hard, and she came to my book signing at Petaluma, and we chatted, and she was like, "Do you want to like hang out?" And I was like, "I would love to hang out."
Great, yeah.
And
I'm sorry, I wasn't accusing you of being a bad person or anything like that. It's how it plays on the page, right? Like on the page, it seems almost cold.
And that's not
from the distance of
inaccurate.
time, probably as much as anything else.
So
yeah.
I, like all of us, have flaws.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Is it weird writing a memoir when you're so young?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talk about it a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, when I signed the book deal, I was 28. And I thought, who wants to read about a 28-year-old? Yeah, I don't know. I was so resistant to memoir and autobio early in my comics making career. And a lot of it is that I was convinced that my life was far too boring for anyone who wants to read about. That was coming from a place of the fact that I would say that my life hasn't had that much external conflict. Almost all the conflict in my life has been very internal. And I didn't realize people were interested in that. But I should have known because I'm interested in that. Like, I like reading of other people's internal struggles. I don't know why. It just took me a while to figure out that maybe people would also be interested in mine.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I felt like, who does he think he is writing a memoir before he turns 30? Like, yeah, it felt a little bit. And like a couple of my family members were like, you're writing a memoir? Like, what? And I was like, I don't know. They agreed to pay for it, so I guess
I'm very glad you did it, and
Me too.
And it's important and it's excellent. But my next question then is what do you do next? Do you know what I mean? Like this is a stupid makes me an old man reference, but there's an issue of Howard the Duck where that it's what do you do the day after you save the universe, right? Like he had saved the universe somehow, and the next issue was like kind of dealing with the come down of
you just lay on a beach and read a book,
right? But
just read a comic and drink some lemonade.
So I guess part of my question is, do you feel that you now have to work in the idiom of memoir for the rest of your life? No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I would like to write another memoir, but I have decided that I will start it when I'm 38.
Okay.
I want a decade to pass.
Okay.
I need to build up more life experiences. So I will certainly, and I still write little short things. Like I write a fair amount for the Nib, and those are memoir pieces in a certain sense. So I will keep doing just little doodly, whatever, small things, but I'm not going to write another memoir book for at least another decade, I've decided. Or thereabout. Like that just seems like I like round numbers.
Sure.
No, I want to write all kinds of things. Like I have 3 children's book pitches that are pretty much ready to go whenever a publisher wants to see them. I have a friend who's writing a young adult sci-fi novel or a graphic novel that he's writing and I would draw, and then I have a fantasy young adult story that I want to tell that includes trans and non-binary teens and dragons. And then I am flirting with the idea of another nonfiction book, but it's much more of like a researched book that would be in it as a character, but it's almost more like a documentary type thing.
Okay. Does the existence of this make doing fiction harder, easier? Do you know yet?
Oh, I chatted with someone about this earlier. I don't think they're here anymore. So the existence of this book gives me confidence that I am able to finish a book because I have done that now.
Yep.
But it does not make the prospect of writing a fiction book any easier. I am massively intimidated by finishing a fiction book because I have written so many fiction projects that have got to about 75% and then totally petered out. And so because
of you or because of something external or?
I think just because I was a young writer and I wasn't ready yet. The Thief's Tale, like I said, I drew 300 pages of a proposed, I think, 400 to 500 pages of that story and then set it down and just have not even looked at it. The main reason is that it's a student project. I started it when I was in my early 20s, and it just has like a lot of kind of weird narrative structure problems that are so hard to fix when you've already drawn the pages. It's not like a novel where you can go back and add scenes.
Sure.
And also, I started it before I was thinking about representation and diversity in media. And after I had the first ever class I ever had that was specifically about race in media, which was in grad school, which is a class by John Jennings, which was called Diversity in Comics, which maybe could have been called Lack of Diversity in Comics. I was like, oh, every single character in this book is white. because I'm a white person. And when I was very young, I didn't think about that. And so I was like, well, that's a problem. And then also it's in a medieval fantasy setting, and I realized I was like, oh, if I expand this world farther, I have to run into questions like, does this fictional world have the same kinds of like history of like imperialism and colonial violence as our current world? And if so, how am I going to speak like ethically about that? And if not, how do I imagine a world in which that had not happened? And like, how do I include like various cultures? And I sort of like, it got into the weeds of world building where I was like, oh, I wasn't thoughtful enough about this at the beginning of the project, and now I'm going to have to like retcon diversity into it if I want it to be a diverse story. And I honestly think that it would be better if I just set it down and just started an entirely new story.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons Tolkien called them hobbits and elves and dwarves to, you know, at the end of the day, you can make things metaphors at that point.
Yeah.
Without it being explicitly.
Yeah, but I love Tolkien so much. Like, I talk about this in the book, but I also like, that's not the kind of story we need today.
Sure.
I mean, written new. We still need it to read. We still need it as a beautiful piece of like something that I read. I read the Lord of the Rings books every summer for 5 years. I mean, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I've read the whole trilogy out loud twice,
Wow.
2 of those times.
Wow.
I read it out loud to Phoebe, who I knew would never get through it otherwise. But like, I don't think that's the stories that, like, that's not what needs to be written in 2019 and in 2020 and in 2021, I don't think.
Okay. Question? All right. Let me ask this one then. So Phoebe is using they, them. You're using, is it Spivak or Spivak?
I say Spivak, but
Okay.
I could be incorrect.
Okay.
Because
It's like Kobabe.
I was going to say, yeah, I don't know. So it's named after a specific person, Michael Spivak, and I don't know. I haven't been able to find out very much about Michael, except that he wrote a book using them, which was a technical manual, and that's sort of like, and then it got from technical manuals into like online gaming spaces into queer spaces. So like, I know the history of it, but I don't know very much about the guy whose name is on it. So.
Okay. So, but you're using your both family members, and you're using different pronoun structures.
Yeah.
And obviously you should be called what you want to be called, and we should respect what your choices are. But isn't it really difficult to individualize what has historically been a collective thing? Did I ask that in the right way?
Yeah. And I would say the answer is yes and no. Yeah, that is a good question. That's a point a lot of people have brought up at various times, both in very unkind ways and in also very like curious, thoughtful, generous ways, which is how I take your question.
That's how it was intended.
I tell that if people have read the book, I had been like waffling on they, them pronouns in like 2016, and even 3 years ago, a lot less people were using they, them pronouns. So it was a weirder choice at that time when I was first thinking about it. And then I re-met my friend Jana B, who came to the signing earlier. And Jana had switched to EMR pronouns since the last time I had seen M. And we had this whole beautiful, wonderful, like deep conversation about gender. And at the end of it, we were both like, oh man, I never even asked your pronouns. What are you using these days? And he, explained the EMR specific pronouns. And I just got this like full body, just like shiver of just like, oh my gosh. And it's a feeling that has a name. It's gender euphoria, which is something that's talked about in trans circles as the opposite of gender dysphoria, a feeling of discomfort in your body. It's a feeling of just delight in your body and in your gender experience. And it's like, I got this feeling of gender euphoria that has only been matched to the first time I got my a first short haircut. And it was a feeling that was illogical, irrational, hard to defend, but also undeniable. And it was like, I chose these pronouns not because they're easy or because they are convenient, but because I love them.
Sure.
And that decision is challenged like now, 3 years on, they, them pronouns are way more used, and I'd say are more accepted and are, I think, heading in the direction of being the mainstream non-binary choice.
Sure.
And sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I should switch to they, them, or I should use them equally. And if people use they, them for me, I'm never mad. It's like I would say they're my second, they're my second favorite.
Sure.
But there are reasons why I chose EMR. And like I said, one of them is just that I love them. Another one is that because people were arguing about they, them more when I chose EMR, and one of the arguments was, it's too difficult. And I was like, well, let me choose something that makes they, them look easy. And if I can be the loud weirdo on the fringe and make life easier for my other non-binary friends who use they, them pronouns, I will consider that a win. So there is some political reasons, I guess you could say, as well. And I mean, yeah, it is somewhat challenging. I think it's I think they're easy to use in writing because you can just write they, them, or their and then just take the th off. But it is difficult to use them fluently in spoken conversation right off the bat. Like,
Sure.
I've practiced a lot, and I still occasionally mess up. But then, like, there's a moment in the book where my mom sort of has this slip up, and then she goes, "Why are you doing this to us?" As if my pronoun choice was like about her.
Sure.
And what and for one, and like the honest answer is, I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing this for myself, and I want you to be in my life, so you are affected by it, and we have like a mutual relationship of trust and respect and love. So we have each chosen to be in each other's lives. So we're choosing to respect what the other person wants. But my snarky answer is like, what in the book is like, I mean, you do like, what are they called, Sudokus all the time. Like, you don't want to keep your mind sharp in your old age?
Sure.
Can you think of a better way to keep your mind agile
Sure.
and sharp than like learning a whole new pronoun set?
Sure.
Like, you're having to make new connections in your brain. Like, I feel like, yeah, it might be difficult, but I think it's good for people.
Oh no, and I accept that premise at its base.
Yeah.
What I'm asking, as a person who has to relearn things at 50 is much harder than relearning things in 20s and 30s. Okay,
it's true.
Is there? And this isn't your question to answer even specifically. You just happen to be sitting here.
Oh, and I'm game to give it a shot.
Okay. So at what point do we accept each individual's desire?
Right,
To be
like
called each individual thing.
Like, would we, if there was like a one-to-one relationship of pronoun to human?
Yeah.
So like if each
Right.
person used
Exactly. And I know that's not really a fair question because that's not the way the world actually works. But it's part of what I struggle with because I very much want to use the pronoun that you want to use. But man, if there's multiple ones and in different circumstances, I can't remember, is this person that? Is that how do I do it and not feel like an ass, I guess?
Well, so a few different points to that. One being, I don't think this is a ridiculous thing to ask because there are people who, especially kind of on the naysayer side of it, who are like, yeah, where will this trend of personalized pronouns end? Will it end with a pronoun set for every single human?
Sure.
And I'm like, obviously that's a logical absurdity. I don't think we're going to end up there. But if you're the type of person who likes to like argue like logic and semantics, I can see where you can say like, this is a possible like extent of this path that maybe we're on. And there are a few different things you can say about that. One, it's unlikely we'll get there, so maybe you don't need to worry about it. B, I mean, everyone has their own individual name.
Sure.
How is it bad? I mean, let's think about it more like from a sci-fi point of view. If everyone had their own set of pronouns and it was like their name, but with like some letters added onto the end of it, we'd get there. I mean, and especially if it was like in a sci-fi society where it was normal, we'd get there. And then, but oh man, I had a third point. Am I gonna forget it? This is why I draw comics.
Yeah, I feel like if we lived in a structure where our language was had more gender usage in general, it would be easier for people to get to that point. Like if it was French, let's say, where every item has a verb tense, so you're already thinking about parsing those kinds of things. But pronouns are collective nouns, right? Essentially,
I remembered.
Or are used collectively.
I remembered my third point. This was my third point. This is to your point of like not feeling like an ass or like not feeling bad of if you make mistakes. Is that in in the ideal world, and of course, sometimes we're closer to it than others, everyone will make their honest best attempt. And the people on the other side of that will recognize the honest best attempt and will see the good intention in it, and so then will not be angry about mistakes.
Sure.
So then it's like, it's a two-way street where you're trying your best,
Sure.
and I'm forgiving you if you mess up,
Sure.
because we both respect each other.
Sure. That sounds beautiful, but that's
isn't that-
not the world that
yeah.
we actually
I
live
know,
in,
so-
right? Because
yeah.
because there's the
I know.
because there's the whole PC culture of, oh, you're microaggressing, you know.
Yeah, it's a bummer because there can be fault from both sides, where sometimes there are people who are just not trying, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the other hand, there are people who angrily jump on every mistake, even if it's done in very innocent error, with the best of intentions. And if only we could all be as patient with each other as angels.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be beautiful?
it would be beautiful.
And the only thing we can do as an individual is just try to idealize that as best we can in our interactions with others, and be generous and be forgiving and be loving with everyone, and try to materialize the world that we wish to see.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And I think this book is a fantastic first step to getting us to that place by giving us the point of view. You know, I was a child at some of the same times that you were. I mean, it's a little 20 years later, but it's still the same like kids are what they are, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we're all freaks in our own ways.
Yes.
And like I understand what you went through a lot better with this, and I think it's really important. Do we have any other questions here from the audience? Yeah. Please.
Yes.
Yeah, so just shifting gears a little bit.
Please.
When I read this, the prologue is like you saying, I'm not going to spill any of my secrets. So when I read that, I was like, oh, the end of the book, you're going to say, that's when I decided to spill all my secrets. But there's not really like a moment where that happens. And you don't even really talk about it that much. And I'm wondering if that's not really something that there was never like a moment. It just kind of like happened gradually.
Yeah, it happened, I would say it happened more gradually. I considered whether I should include more sort of meta stuff in the comic about the making of the comic, and I decided not to, partly because I just didn't think it was going to add much. I have a feeling if I write that second memoir in 10 years, I will have to write about the process of writing this book and what it has meant in my life, because that will probably be a significant thing that, I mean, it will be considered an event of my life that is relevant to the story of gender. Yes, it's, yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bookending moment. That would have been really sweet. Why didn't you tell me this a year ago?
You could have drawn yourself as Frodo, like right in.
Oh my God. And then the lawyers would have said, you have to cut that. Yeah, I would say I didn't include that because it was a bit more gradual, and if I had included it, it would have been the moment of drawing those first 60 comics and then taking the plunge of, I'm going to post these on Instagram. And I just didn't want to, I don't know, like I said, I considered including a scene of like, and then I decided to write about this and post it on the internet, but I was just like, it just felt a little too self-referential, and like the kind of thing you can do when you're a well-known author, but the kind of thing that seems a bit arrogant when you're a first-time author. Yeah.
So what I would say is I read that exact same intro and it was more like, and here they are.
Yeah.
Like there didn't need to be that epilogue because you had, that was the book.
Yeah.
It's like, here are my secrets. Or at least many of them that you chose to share.
Yeah.
My question is.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
That was just an addendum. To
Yeah.
My question is, what has been the experience of having your book out in the world, and how is that different from the things that you've shared on Instagram and other stories, having your book in people's hands and reaching a much larger audience? What has that been like?
It has been overwhelming and incredible and much more emotional than I was expecting. Yeah, I mean, I've been self-publishing since like 2012, so I have a lot of experience of like making a thing and like being at Zine Fest and selling them, but that's all very small scale on the distribution front. And it's been wild. Like there's times I still don't half believe it, especially when I get things like someone will like message me and be like, I bought it in Berlin. And I'm like, Berlin? What? How did it get there? You know? Or someone will message me like, please say you're coming to Australia. And I'm like, I mean, would I win the lottery? I don't know. Like,
Anything translated to Australian?
oh, you. Yeah, so it's been really, I mean, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, the press has been really, really good. I just got a starred review in the school library journal, like today. It made like Barnes & Noble's best graphic novels of May, and it's already been nominated for something. It actually was nominated before it even came out officially, which is just, you know, it's just astonishing. And then the thing that I didn't expect.
But not to a lot of people.
Yeah. And then I had no idea how many people were going to read it and then reach out to me personally. I've been getting a lot of messages, email and Instagram and stuff, of people, you know, wanting to, usually saying, I just finished it, and I wanted to say, you know, what it meant to me. And which is like so, it's so heartwarming and touching, I hardly even know what to do with it. And I feel like I want to write a personalized like thank you note to each and every one of these people, which I have been trying to keep up with. And I didn't expect that like the 2 to 3 weeks after the release of my book would be spent just writing thank you notes like all day long. But it's a really great feeling.
Have you gotten any blowback?
Very little. Like maybe, I've been looking for it. I'm not looking for it at all. I think one person made a mean YouTube video about it.
Okay.
I didn't watch it.
Yeah. But nobody's like emailing you like you're the spawn of the devil or
No,
whatever those
not
people
yet.
think.
Not
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
We'll see.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I know an early person to read it was Jimmy Robinson, who's published loads of comics. I'm in a writing crit group with him, and he's a very sweet man. And he read the first half of the script, and he goes, "This is really good. Also, you should go make friends with the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, like right now, because this is gonna get banned."
It will.
Yeah.
It probably will.
Yeah. And I was like, all right. And he's a guy who's had books banned, so he knows. And I was like, make note of that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna out myself and say I haven't read it yet.
Oh.
Just,
How dare.
but since we were talking about it earlier, is
Yeah.
there anyone, you were talking about this exact thing, is there anyone in this room who's in the book?
Just myself. Yeah. But someone who was in the book stopped by earlier at the signing, but went home to go to bed early.
That was a good story you gave earlier about.
Oh yeah, I did. So my hometown signing, which was in Petaluma, there was one moment where I looked around and realized like 6 or 7 people who were in the book were all in the comic book shop. And we forgot to take a group photo.
Oh.
So no record of that remains. Alas.
That's not good.
That's okay.
The last scene, you're talking about working with kids and the next time I'm going to come out. Did you?
No.
Has there been a next time?
There has been and I didn't.
Yeah.
But I came out in different circumstances. I don't know, that's, or maybe there have been some times where I've come out and other times where I haven't. That would be more accurate to say. I was teaching a batch of high school students, and that seemed appropriate. Like I didn't worry about their age groups. Like it seemed like they can handle this. So I did come out and use my pronouns and write them on the board and stuff when I was teaching. The next time I taught a batch of high school students, but the next time I taught this particular class that's referenced there is. It's their Girl Scouts, and sometimes the batches are older than others, and the next batch was like, they just looked so young. And also, some of their moms sat in on the class, and I was like, I'm not ready for this. So that's been another interesting thing, is when I first started using the EMR pronouns, I was very militant about using them in every circumstance, and I've become much more choose my battlesy about it. And what I've realized is that there are times when it feels really productive to introduce them and to start a conversation about it, and there are other times where it does not feel productive. And honestly, I'm better off saving my energy for the productive times so that I can be just bring my A game when it's going to mean something, and maybe not, like I remember I tried to use them at the dentist office.
Okay. Okay.
Not worth it.
Okay.
Not worth it. Yeah.
How do you know that it's worth it or not? Is it that they're responding right away, or?
It's more about what kind of relationship do I have with this person. Very early on, I decided I am never correcting a wait staff person on my pronouns, because waiters, I would much rather they remembered my food order than my pronouns. And also, they are working very hard. They're on their feet. They have to remember a million things, and it doesn't matter if I get called ma'am in a restaurant. Like, it's not going to injure me. And I just don't want to make a hard job harder for someone.
Sure.
And that's part of that, like, extending courtesy to another
Sure.
human being. So I do not use them in restaurants, and I do not use them in places where the interaction is like a brief one where, like, I'm probably never going to talk to this person again. The places where it is important to me, it is very important to me to use them in a professional sphere. So I always use my pronouns, and I always correct people when I am in a comic setting, in work emails, when I'm doing interviews, anything like that. That is the most important. Friends is the second most important. Family is it's like a third most important. Like, I will correct my family, but I'm not like, sometimes I'll correct them like once in a conversation,
Right.
and not the next couple of times, and then maybe like the fifth time I'll be like, just FYI, you messed up the last 4 times. But I didn't want to break your flow because that was a really great story. Like, please do tell me more about that. You know, I mean, I just try to gauge the room.
Yeah.
The dentist office is not the room.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think that yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Please, Miles.
Just wondering, is dude gender neutral?
Such a good question. Yeah. I use dude and man a lot. I'm from California. I would almost say yes, but the thing is not everyone says yes. So, like, I am fine being called dude, and I will call other non-binary friends dude, but if they're like, I don't really like being called dude, I'll be like, okay, I won't. And I will try my very best not to. And if I slip, I will say, ugh, sorry. So I'm okay if you call me dude, but yeah, that's kind of a check-in on, I would say, with other NB folks. Yeah. Good question.
Related to that, what about you guys?
Oh, that one is more gendery for me. And that one, I do teach, and I used to say you guys all the time in the classroom, and I've been working very hard to get that out of my language. So now I address every class instead as dear students. And dear students, we are moving on to the next exercise. Dear students, if we get a little bit more quiet in the classroom. So I've been pretty good on the you guys. That one I got. For me, I don't know, dude is almost like and like, I don't know, it's like hella, it's just one of our words. It's just, we're from California, I don't know. But you guys, to me, is a little bit more. But again, if someone says that to me, I'm kind of like, I don't know, I'm just.
Just FYI, it's the opposite on the East Coast. You
Interesting.
guys is gender neutral, dude is not.
So, I love these regional different, see?
Call everyone y'all.
Y'all's gender neutral.
No, I've done that in mixed rooms before, and I'm wondering, like, what do you call a group of your friends? What would you be like, hey?
I might just say hey all, or hey friends, or like, I don't know, I really like my friends, so I might just call them darlings, or hey my loves, I don't know. I really like my friends. How much do you like your friends?
Put me on the spot.
Hey sweethearts.
All right.
Hey my loves. Hey human beings that I love very much. Yeah.
I think the last place that I wanted to ask you about the text is there's the scene, and I don't have it flagged or anything, but the scene with your aunts.
Yes.
Where she's, I don't know the right way to put what her complaint was in terms of. I mean, I think it has to do with being a feminist of a certain age.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Is that a common thing that you encounter? And again, is this the kind of thing that time will eventually make all of us old people die and you know, so language will change the way it needs to? Or I didn't ask that question right, but you know what I mean.
No, I understand what you mean. So, the section with my aunt, that's a big piece. And if you ask me, like, what one person were you most thinking of as the audience for your book, it's my aunt who's in the book. She came out as a lesbian feminist before I was even born in like the 70s. I actually had another queer family member who came out even earlier. This is part of why I knew it was going to be very easy to come out, especially on my mom's side. It's like I already had out family members. So when I was first coming out as non-binary, I figured this is my Aunt Sherry. We're very close. We talk a lot. We have the same taste in books, and like we've been nerding out since I could learn to read. So I figured, oh, well, she's going to get this right away. She probably knows more queer and trans people than anyone else in my family. It's like she's going to be my corner right away. And that wasn't quite the case. Like she actually struggled with it maybe more than some of my other family members because she'd actually thought about it a little bit more. And yeah, it is, like you said, it is kind of a generational thing. There, specifically, some like feminists, which somewhat Venn diagrams with lesbians, but not as 100% overlapping, of a certain era, sometimes have beliefs that are trans-exclusive beliefs that are like, it's as a feeling of that trans women should not be allowed in women's only spaces, that a trans woman is going to somehow make that space like less safe. This is a real bummer of a belief. It's hard because it's often coming from a place of really deep pain. A lot of times the person who feels that way has been really hurt by the world. And that person deserves to feel safe. But so does the woman who happens to be trans, who may also have been really injured by the world. And it's this place where people's traumas are directly sort of like hitting into each other and creating even more trauma for everyone, which is just really sad. And it makes me really sad that, especially because it causes infighting amongst queer and feminist and lesbian spaces. And in a way that's just like, I wish we could all unite because there are so many other forces opposing us. I wish we could all work together. And this is just like a place of conflict that I don't know, maybe time will resolve it, though unfortunately there are like also young people who are actually picking up these beliefs from their elders, so that the beliefs aren't just gonna like slowly, totally fade out. They actually are being reintroduced at like the intro level as well. So I would say that my aunt had some, what I might call like proto-TERF beliefs. But she very much was saying, look, this is a thing that I feel, but I recognize that my feelings on this are probably outdated. They're coming from kind of a while back in the community, and I'm very open to new information about this. She would say things like, please like recommend me some reading. Like do you have any, like, who are your favorite trans authors? Like what book should I be reading? And we were both like, again, we were committed to the relationship of like respect and care. And so we were both willing to sit down and hear each other's sides and have a conversation about it, knowing that we both loved each other and so that it was a safe space, even if we disagreed on things. And both of us were willing to like hear the other one out and be like, I see why you're saying that. I wish that was the case with everyone who had these beliefs, would be willing to sit down to like a really like thoughtful, deep, emotional, like caring kind of conversation in which maybe their views could evolve. But some people are going really hardcore on the exclusion of trans people in otherwise feminist spaces, which is, it's going to be a continuing struggle in queer spaces going forward for probably a while.
People are dramatically more complex than you would think that they might be. You know, I mean, I've watched it from the outside, living in San Francisco for the last 30 years, and just watching how many gay men can't stand lesbianism, period. You know?
And again, why are
and you're like, but you're fighting for the same thing at the end of the day.
Which is to be treated like a human being.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know.
Exactly.
I know. And it's really painful to see people infighting like this. And I wish it didn't happen. I don't know the solution other than, like I said, just being open to just listening to people.
Yeah.
Listening to where they're coming from. Like exactly like you said, everyone is more complicated than you think.
Yeah.
And every job is going to take longer than you thought it will.
Yeah.
These are some truisms.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think a book like this is so important. That you're telling us your truth in a way that we can not just grasp, but we can internalize in a way that if you had made a video of it, I would probably have bounced off it, to be honest, you know?
Yeah.
But by being able to live in your head and again, see, oh, you're just as much of a geek nerd as I am. Holy shit, we've got all these things in common. So, wow, I actually get what you're saying, you know? It's important. And so I really want to thank you for making this book and for being brave enough to do it and for sharing it with us. Yeah. So, Maia, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for making the book. That's the fantastic thing. So just a little bit of business here. I forgot to do it at the top of the show. I want to thank The Beat, www.comicsbeat.com, who sponsors these shows and helps bring it to a wider audience and helps get the message out. And it's really important. So go there, click, do whatever you need to make that work. Write Heidi a letter going, thank you for supporting this. I really appreciate it.
Heidi was one of my editors very early on.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I love Heidi.
And then next month's book, we're gonna feature Die by Kieran Gillen, which is a fantastic book. Man, this book is so good. And the book plate, which I don't have one in here, but the book plate's really beautiful too. Kieran is here on July 24th. So put this on your notes, and hopefully some of you will come out, and we'll talk to Kieran Gillen, who apparently we now have to call Dr. Kieran Gillen because he got
an
honorary degree from some college, so we're gonna have to call him Dr. Gillen, which will be utterly amusing. And then the other thing I just want to sort of point out to people is we have, who is a god of comics making, we have Stan Sakai coming in. Who's the creator of Usagi Yojimbo. That's June 29th. That's not connected to the book clubs at all, but noon to 2 on June 29th, Stan Sakai is going to be here. So come out, because that man can draw, and Usagi Yojimbo is great comics. Once again, thank you for this. Thank you for coming out. Thank all of you for coming out and being part of this conversation. I'm Brian Hibbs. This was the Comics Experience Craft Novel of the Month Club for June. We'll see you next month.
Yay!